Welcome to College Sports Conversations, presented by the NCAA. I'm Corbin McGuire, and this edition's guest is Josie Nicholson, counseling and sports psychologist at Ole Miss and host of the podcast United, where sports psychologists and mental health professionals team up to hold conversations for student athletes on mental health. Josie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Before we get into the thick of it, first off, just how are you doing? What has this pandemic been like for you? I know we're all going through it in our own way, but as a mental health professional and just in general, what has it been like for you to go through this?
You know, it's so funny. My colleagues and I joke so much that whenever you say, how's it going? It's such a loaded question now, right? And there should be some quick phrase that can embody like as good as anybody could expect. So I'm doing well. I think it's been obviously challenging. So I've really challenged myself to try to take in and remember the good that's coming out of it, as well as the challenges. I think I've seen on social media things like we're all in the same boat. We're all going through this together. And the reality is it's the same storm, but it's very different boats. And I am incredibly grateful for my boat. It's, in many ways, I have been very fortunate in this. So it's been awesome to have opportunities to reach out maybe to people that are their boat, doesn't have a motor or whatever. So.
Yeah, that's just great perspective. And I think a great segue into, the reason I wanted to talk to you today is this podcast. It's one of the ways you stay connected both with student athletes and just with people in general during this time. But can you give us a background or the origin story of United, how and why it kind of came to be and who was all involved?
Yes. And I guess I can give the long version since I'm here. So, I had actually toyed around with the idea of doing a podcast as a way to reach student athletes just at my university for performance, because I found myself having the same conversation over and over. And I was like, it would be nice if there was a way to get all this information out in a consumable platform that student athletes can access. So I had actually toyed around with that idea, and I recorded the first performance episode during our spring break, which is when everything the world fell apart. And then when I was on the phone trying to figure out, okay, the students aren't coming back, we're not sure about the rest of the season, there's postponement, I thought about Mark and Kim Helinski and how amazing their work has been over the past nearly 2 years of being on the road, visiting student athletes, and connecting with them in person, personally. And I thought, they're going to struggle with not being able to do that because it's such a part of their heart and their service. So I just called them up to tell them I was thinking about them and that I was very willing to brainstorm ideas. And I kicked around, and it may have been that conversation or a different conversation. And I said, it would be great for there to be a podcast around like how to handle mental health at this time. And I didn't really see myself in that role necessarily, especially beyond my own student athletes. But I figured, I'll try anything twice. So I figured I'd give it a shot and see how it went. And it went and it kept going. And it was so beneficial to me that I couldn't not do it,
For those maybe unaware of Kim and Mark Helinski and Helinski's Hope and that whole story, can you kind of give some background on it and that foundation and the work that Mark and Kim do, which is so important across the nation for student athletes?
Absolutely. So in January of 2018, their middle son, Tyler, who was the quarterback at Washington State, took his life. And they immediately kind of went into how can we help others, because they didn't realize that he had been suffering. They didn't realize that he was struggling with mental health. And so the idea around breaking the stigma, around helping people, particularly student athletes that are in this culture of tough it out, don't, say anything, never show weakness, and weaknesses in asking help, to break that down so that people, and especially student athletes, can feel like they can reach out and ask for help. And that's been their mission. So they go to different universities, all through the foundation. So it's all on Holinsky's Hope's dime, and talk to student athletes about, they share their story. They talk to coaches, they'll talk to anybody. And they share Tyler's story, and they share the impact that it's had on them and their family and their hopes for the future. And they are changing lives. So it's really hard to not want to be a part of that.
I've spoken with a few people who have either listened to some of their presentations or just spoken with them in general, and they're just great people who are doing great work. And now you're helping them carry that mission through this podcast. What was their reaction when you kind of brought up this idea? Maybe a podcast can bridge that gap while we're going through all of this.
Well, they're so receptive to anything that might help one person. So they thought it was a great idea. And so we kind of put together, okay, what would it look? They have some great resources and connections too. So they were able to help me clean up some of my ideas from, the amateur perspective that I have. And so they've been unbelievably supportive.
I believe you launched like March 31st, mm-hmm. and you've had like 50 episodes since then, which I'm sure when you think about it, just seems crazy. But in your mind, what do you feel like the podcast has provided student athletes, those who have been listening regularly or sporadically? What do you hope it's given them?
I think, so I think part of it actually, right after they weren't allowed to return to campuses, I think it gave them a way to kill 40 minutes of a day, which is very useful, if you can feel like you're being productive or doing something in a different vein. And I hope that it's given them a different way to think about some stuff. I hope that it's given them validation, because everybody that's come on has been like, this is tough, this is hard, and we need to have some grace for ourselves at the same time. So I hope that it's also given them hope and new ways of moving through not just a global pandemic or issues around social justice, but their lives, because, it doesn't automatically get easier once you graduate at all. So.
No doubt. And as one who's listened to some of the episodes, I will testament to that. Some of those episodes have helped me. I didn't necessarily know I needed it. But so I think it's just a great resource. And I'm curious, what type of feedback have you received from student athletes who have listened, like I said, regularly or just sporadically? What have you heard in terms of feedback?
I've heard a lot of, that was really helpful, or I haven't thought of it in that way. I didn't realize that I could benefit from that, is another one. And I always say, well, you don't have to be sick to want to get better. We can all improve in a lot of different areas of our life. And, that really resonated with me. So I think it's given the message that whether you're in college, whether you're a professional, we are all human, and there's nothing special necessarily about me at all. I'm going through this and I'm struggling with this and that. And so it's not, Yeah, so it's not like I'm the adult, I'm the sports psychologist. It's like I'm a human and you're a human, and here's another human talking about how we can get through what's going on in humanity right now.
And some of the humans you brought on have been student athletes as well. And I know that's something you added as kind of this thing has evolved. So I'm curious, just what do you think the student athletes have added in terms of perspective to the podcast and just relatability?
Well, it's just that, right? It's relatability. We know from research that the more somebody looks like you, or you can see them doing the same things, or, you know, whether it's age or size or race, whatever it is, that you're able to create an image of yourself doing it. The closer somebody else's image is to yours. So I think relatability, they're all stories of resilience.
Yeah.
And that's the number one message I think that has been woven through, other than Brene Brown is fantastic. She's pops up in every episode, but you know, I think the number one message is we are amazingly resilient, and we will not just get through it, but we can thrive through these obstacles. So every student athlete that's come on has said, this was a struggle for me, and here's how I got through it, and it wasn't easy, and now I'm here, and I want people to know you're not alone.
How do you go about determining topics or themes for these episodes? And especially you bring on professionals throughout the NCAA from different schools. Just can you kind of walk me through just the process you have in, you know, building these episodes, since you put out, you know, 2 or 3 a week?
It's a lot of wadding up spitballs and spitting them through straws. Like, really, it's I mean, at first it was a lot of my buddies, you know, and it still is. I mean, a lot of these people are people that I know, that I've had similar conversations with in the past. I know Letitia Bader is phenomenal when she talks about substance abuse and use and athletes. And I know I've had conversations about gratitude with Nicole Gabbana. So sometimes it's really easy, like, hey, can we get on and talk about this, you know? But other times it's like, you know, I just had a text conversation with somebody, like, I'd love to have you on. Just, you're a great professional, your energy. You could talk about whatever you're passionate about that you think would be helpful for student athletes right now. So what do you find yourself talking to your athletes about? Well, let's get it bigger, you know? And then a lot of times, like, I had an organization on, 2 organizations, one-on-one, and then Strengthen Stories. And so in talking to those former student athletes, one of them had a great story. It was like, hey, let's focus on you for one. And so it's just kind of, you know, who pops up. And I'm very opportunistic, and I don't mind being told no, or, you know, Tuesday, Gabby Reese is going to be on. And yes, and so that was just, I stumbled across her podcast, and there was an email in the link, and I like, whatever, I'll try anything. So.
Well, it works out well, especially just the variety of topics and people you're able to bring on. What do you feel like, as a mental health professional and someone who's done this for 10 or so years, what have you gained from this podcast, talking to peers and student athletes, and how do you feel like you've benefited?
Oh my gosh. So in a moment of authenticity, I believe that this was something that was put in my life to really help me thrive through the pandemic and all the other challenges that 2020 has brought, because my coping mechanism is, when things get hard, I work harder. And so I put my head down and I grind. And sometimes, especially when you have to be intentional about connecting and you have to make sure that, I mean, I'm not a Zoom fan, so I'm not, going to organically like, let's get on a Zoom call. And so it really put into my path these conversations that I needed and these connecting with friends. And I don't know that I would have thought to do that. It's really given me a purpose as well. I mean, to take the work that I feel very confident and comfortable in and to turn it upside down and say, now you have to figure out connecting in an intimate way virtually. And you can't meet with teams, and your consultation with coaches is gonna look a bit different, and you can't just breathe in the energy of your college campus, which I think is so important. It was a place where I could just have conversations and feel at ease. Like, yeah, this is great information, So that is definitely most of the way I've benefited. And other than that, you know how it is when you do something and you teach something, it doesn't not necessarily mean you do it all the time. And so it's reminders to, okay, you could do 3 days straight of gratitude practice, or weave in some mindfulness, or, other things that we've talked about. And so that's been very helpful.
I'm sure those who've listened to feel the same way. And there, like I mentioned earlier, there's been a variety of people and topics. And if you could boil that down to a few mental health themes or self-care tips, anything, could you generalize some of those topics that you kind of are overarching themes throughout the episodes?
I really think hope and resilience, as I mentioned, that has been woven through. Self-compassion is one that you have to be able to say, like, now is not the time to expect 100% anything, that we're going to give 100% of the 80 that we have, or whatever it is. And that's been a big theme. That's why Brene Brown's work comes up so much, because she's, kind of the spokesperson for self-compassion. And so those have been the main themes. The other thing is that it doesn't take a lot to get a little bit better, pausing, breathing for a minute can improve your day so much. So I've noticed that none of these things are complete changes to your life. They're 5-minute a day kind of things, and accessible. So I've really liked that.
Again, for those who may not know who Brene Brown is, why should they know about her, and what is she about?
So she is a shame researcher. She's, I'm blanking on the university where she is, but she has written Daring Greatly is my favorite book by her, but The Gift of Imperfection. So her work focuses a lot on being human, and how perfectionism is driven by shame. So we get a lot of our self-worth from what we do rather than who we are. And it's hard for us to accept that who we are is just okay without the certificates on the wall, the trophies lining the hallway and stuff. So, so she's a great resource. She has an amazing TED Talk. She has a podcast that is great. In fact, I will share a little story that the night before I recorded the first episode with Tom Golightly, her podcast had launched a couple of days before, and I sat down to listen to it, and it was on FFTs, the whole episode. And I won't say the first word, but the F and the T that follows is first times. So it's about how anything that we do for the first time is the essence of vulnerability, because it's so new and it's so uncomfortable, and it's very difficult to feel confident in that arena. So I found a lot in that, and I was like, okay, Brene's speaking directly to me, because we're like that.
Yes, best friends for sure.
Yeah.
And just bouncing off of her, some of what you just said, it seems so relatable to what student athletes went through at the heart of this pandemic, when their sports were stripped away from them. They were sent home, away from their teammates and coaches and the routines that they knew. So can you kind of just describe the challenges that student athletes have faced from a mental health perspective during this pandemic? How unique is this period for them and what they're going through?
Well, I cannot think of another situation that is anything like it, and I hope there's nothing to come that's like it, although there probably will be at some point in history. But I think it's important first to remember that not all athletes return to great environments, and it's really difficult to imagine. You graduate high school, you get this opportunity to play, less than 2% of whatever sport it is plays at the D1 level. And then you also have D2 and D3. And so you have this incredible opportunity. You go to college, you're becoming your own person, you're becoming an adult. And then all of a sudden you have to move back to your parents' house. It's like, wah, wah, wah. And for a lot of them, that's not for some of them, it's not a great situation. But at best, it's a renegotiation of, I was in my own space and now I'm in somebody else's space. And I had this routine and now I don't have any routine. I have these things that bring me great comfort. That is exercise and connecting with my friends and being able to move in my own way. And all of that is stripped away. So the social support and the coping mechanisms and all those sorts of things. So really confusing, disconcerting. I had Dr. Ray Merck on talking about family and how you can appreciate being with your family and yet recognize that it's difficult, because it's not, once you leave after high school, it's not really your house anymore necessarily. And they're like, well, as long as you're under our roof, it's our rules. Fair enough. But I've had the other side now and I'm coming back. So all of that, also just not having access to the thing that makes them tick, which is typically getting better in their sport. And so you can train with resistance bands or run sprints in your driveway, but you're not being challenged in the way that makes you better. So that, just to lose all that, I can't even imagine,
And then there's the unknown factor that I think we're still living in, even though sports are kind of back. We've got football going on right now, but even that's unknown from week to week for the conferences that are playing. Yeah. How much can the anxiety from unknown and just not the uncertainty of what's going to come in the weeks and the months and the year to come, how does that factor into student athlete mental health and kind of what they're going through?
I think it factors in, it cannot be underestimated. Think about whatever it is that is most precious to you, whether it's independence or education, like whatever it is. And then somebody's holding it in front of you, takes it away for a while, says, well, you'll probably get it back. It's going to look different, but you're going to get it back. You're like, well, how is it going to look different? This is mine. This is what makes me tick and drives me and what I live for right now. And it's actually a huge part of who you are. And so then I say, okay, you can sort of have it back now And you're like, okay. And then it's like, oh, wait, just kidding. Okay, wait. Well, we're not sure. Well, maybe. Okay, you could have this shortened version. You can play these teams only. We don't know when it's going to end. That is just so back and forth. And there's no, we all want to know what's coming in front of us, but student athletes are a different breed, where that certainty, that expectation, they have to plan their lives down to the literally minute in a lot of ways. And so to throw all that up in the air and say, you may have to, do a 180 tomorrow. And then they finally get back to campus. And at any point in time, they could be told, you have 10 minutes to gather your things. You need to go to an isolation room, and that's scary, and then you see people in the grocery store or moving through your space that aren't wearing a mask. And it's like, or they're having parties or whatever it is. And it's like, you are putting what is precious to me and a huge part of me at risk. So it's a lot.
It is a lot. And I can't imagine.
Mm-hmm.
What are you telling your student athletes at Ole Miss to try to ease those nerves as much as you can, or just to give them some tools to work through this?
So the number one thing that I've been saying is, yes, this is really hard, and you have to give yourself some grace through it, which has been really hard for me, because I forget sometimes. I'm like, oh, why did I not do that as well? And I'm like, oh, right, global pandemic. So it's hard to keep it in the forefront, because in some ways we're trying to pretend like things are normal. So to look for connection, to look for opportunities. I've set up some COVID groups where they can get on Zoom and just talk about what it's like to have to be quarantined for a bit. And because that's really hard. You get back with your team and all of a sudden, just kidding. So I'm saying a lot about the reality that this is actually what athletes train for, is the unexpected. I mean, you perfect your craft so that it doesn't matter what comes at you, you're solid. And that's kind of what we need to work on doing, is to fortify our inner resources, and it's different for everybody. For a lot of people, mindfulness is key. For some people it's connecting with friends and family more regularly, or playing the musical instrument that they love, or I don't know, riding a horse, like whatever it is, to fortify that and make it so that your inner peace is unshaken by the situation. And really difficult, because it's not like you don't see the situation, but when you have a ball, I was a soccer player, so I always talk in soccer language. So when you have the ball and this person is coming at you, and the first thought is, where did that speed come from? And you're so good that you're able to get around them, or do a move to get around them without thinking about it, because that's how honed you are. And that's what athletes train for, is the unexpected. It just feels different, and we tend to struggle with confidence around our inner resources when it comes to, okay, the whole world rather than just the pitch. So,
speaking of resources, I want to kind of tie it into a positive note here. You've been a part of this for, like I said, 10 years or so as a mental health professional in college athletics. Where have we come in mental health from then to now? What type of progress has been made?
Man, a lot. It was really cool to get Ivan Mazel's perspective on that in one of the episodes, shifts in the conversation, because he has seen it from the journalist perspective and the writer's perspective. And, we both kind of see that it was so stigmatized that the only way I could talk to coaches was to emphasize my performance enhancement training. So hey, I can help them with their free throw percentage. I can help them, and it wasn't really talked about. And for some, it was actually like, well, these are athletes. They're not vulnerable to mental health struggles. It's like, actually, they're more vulnerable because they're under more pressure, all the things, right? So we've come to a realization. A lot of that is from people speaking out and say, Kevin Love just had that thing on social media to others who struggle, or however he titled it. That was brilliant. Being able to see these people are very successful, because I think for a while the stigma was so great that it was like, you cannot have mental health struggles and be successful professionally. I think it's been so valuable to see whether it's celebrities, professional athletes, being able to say, I am very successful as a professional and I struggle with mental health. And it's very real, because for so long it was something that needed to be hidden, especially from coaches, mainly because coaches at one time were so uncomfortable with any sort of perceived vulnerability. And now it's more accepted. Like, if you want a great athlete, you have to take the whole person and make the whole person whole, and I think also there's more awareness as coaches get younger. Is that a way to say it? Like, of a newer generation or whatever, there's more talk around it. They, people in their family have opened up and things like that. So more receptivity, and because more people are speaking out, like, hey, this interferes with my performance, and if I can get this taken care of, then I'm going to be better in my sport. So there was a time when sports psychologists kind of got their in with the performance piece. Right. And now it's like, they may be coming for performance or mental health, but it's all going to make them better. So, they're a lot better with it. There is still stigma that needs to be broken down, but it is definitely, we've come a long way with it.
How have student athletes led the charge in this? What role have they played in the progress that has been made?
Absolutely key. So, the Division I SAC, I think also the NCAA has been listening more. Brian Hainline's played a key role in opening up those conversations and saying, we need to pay attention to everything that the student athletes are saying, and mental health always comes up. Because the other thing too is 20 years ago, you didn't have, first of all, there was an off season for whatever sport. You didn't have the, micromanaging of schedule. You didn't have all the pressure. If in college, there's no digital evidence of my college years, thank goodness. So there's, but now if an athlete makes a mistake, they could be attacked on Twitter by a stranger, or they may make the ESPN worst play, or I forget the name of that. And that just wasn't pressure that I understood, So yes, mental health is going to be really important, because they have to withstand being on a bigger stage than I could imagine, and so having them use their voice and say, we do want more resources, and we do want to be able to take care of ourselves. We want some boundaries around the way coaches are able to, monopolize our time. We want some say in how we spend our free time, and getting off days that are actually off, and everything like that. So them recognizing that they are important and they have a voice that needs to be heard has been so key.
I think we've definitely entered an era of student athletes finding their voice and feeling empowered. And I think especially this year as we think about the social injustice that's happened, I guess what's that been like to see that from your perspective, to see student athletes really feel that confidence to speak up and use their platforms?
It's been so cool. I've been so excited. I mean, people that have felt silenced for so long and have just had the brunt of some really egregious injustice have finally been able to stand out and stand together and have allies and accept allies, and that's really been unifying. And so it's been very exciting. It's been frustrating at times because of all the things we have to do this in a mask, which is almost metaphorical in some ways, and I was able to have a really cool conversation early on with Dr. Kensa Gunter about just the difference in my experience of wearing a mask walking into a store and one of our football players walking into a mask who is Black. It's different. And in some ways that's been disheartening to see the challenges of our Unity walk on campus had to be limited in number because of COVID. And yet it's brought some things to the surface. Like, you can't deny that this experience of just the pandemic is different, or the access to healthcare resources. So it's highlighted some things like that. And so being able to amplify that voice and learn a lot about being an ally has been so valuable for me. But it's just been amazing to see the passion and the changes. And most of the changes that I've seen are in people's hearts. Yeah. And I mean, in Mississippi, of course, we can't, downplay it all. We changed our state flag, finally, after 20 years of fight. But the most important changes I've seen are in people's ways of thinking and their hearts. And that's been phenomenal. And our athletes have led the way in that.
Well, Josie, I want to thank you again for coming on, and I'll offer you any closing words just about what this has been like to run a podcast like this, and to bring some hope to people's ears all over the country, all over the world.
Well, I really appreciate that. It's very humbling. I mean, one thing that I would say is we can all make a difference, if it's one person doing one thing, whether it's returning a shopping cart that was left in the middle of of a parking space, or trying something new that you don't see yourself doing. It doesn't have to be great. It has to be hopeful. And that's more about where your heart is rather than your skills are. So that's kind of been my guiding light. Like, I can mess up, but if it comes from the right place, I can fix anything, and it doesn't have to be phenomenal. It just has to be out there.
Well said. Well said. For people who may want to learn more about United or even listen in, where can they find more information or find the episodes?
You can listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. But I've learned that one. But actually, to the United, the E in United is a 3 for Tyler. So yeah, we have an Instagram page. So that kind of uploads with some resources or quotes to remind people about different episodes. And then on www.holinskyshope.org, there is a page for United where we have other resources. Like if we mentioned a book, you can find all the information there, or some handouts, ways to contact our speakers to learn more. So.
Well, I know where I'm going next. Josie, Thanks again. I really appreciate you coming on. This has been an honor and really a joy just to speak with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate all that you're doing.
Well, there you have it. Thanks again, Josie. That does it for this edition of College Sports Conversations. Thanks for tuning in.